Oh man, am I excited for today's list, my friends. The Xbox 360 is pretty infamous for having a tiny library of super mid JRPGs, with maybe one or two standout exceptions. And as the JRPG trash man, I'm really in my element here. Microsoft really tried to push its market share in the mecca for video games, Japan, where the OG Xbox gained very little traction, and they famously failed despite the Xbox 360 having over 20 JRPGs. That's right, there's over 20 titles to explore today, more than you may have expected. And I'm excluding any digital-only titles, so just physical Western releases today, so many of which are deliciously mid. But are they honestly all bad? Well, no, but it is a pretty impressive collection of extremely medium games. Why do I love the cringe of mid-tier JRPGs so much, you may ask? Well, that's a personality defect even I don't fully understand, my friends. Today's list is ranked in the order in which I think you should pick them up, but reversed. So we're going to cover the stinkiest of the stinkers first, then advance through a list of increasingly recommended titles as we go. Not even sure if that made sense, but let's get started anyway. In my humble opinion, the worst JRPG on today's list is Zoid's Assault. Now, this is not a game I own, it's not a game I want to own, as it's quite bad in my opinion and quite expensive, but I think my opinion should be taken with a grain of salt, as I have not played this one specifically. While I don't have direct experience though, I have watched playthroughs and read reviews, both modern and from the time of release, and yeah, tactical mech combat sounds really cool on paper, and it can be, as other titles have proven, but despite attempts to make something really cool and realistic, the game just ends up looking and feeling bland. Zoid's Assault lovers, maybe you can convince me it's decent in the comments, but from what I've seen, this is the least desirable game on the console to pick up, especially given its high price tag. Operation Darkness honestly has a compelling premise, being a retelling of World War II, but with fantasy elements such as werewolves and vampires added. Unfortunately, it was shot with a silver bullet by critics for having last-gen graphics, clunky controls, and a middling story. This is a good time to remind you, though, that this list is ranked in reverse order of my personal recommendations for you to buy, meaning price matters. So while this isn't necessarily the second worst JRPG on the console, though it's surely close, the price tag is the cherry on top of a generally poor gameplay experience that makes this one to avoid. Hey, by the way, if you're a Nintendo Switch owner, go check out my top 30 Switch JRPGs video after this. It's the best list I've made thus far, and the games are absolutely incredible. Anyways, back to the Xbox 360. You know, I really wish Culdcept's Saga executed on its card-battling board game system better, because it genuinely is an interesting concept, and I love card battling. Unfortunately, the battles tend to drag on for way too long, and stay relatively static in terms of gameplay through the experience, so it just becomes kind of a repetitive slog. I'm putting it above the last couple games for having such a cool idea behind it that some will enjoy, but it's another prohibitively expensive title to avoid in my opinion because it's just not that good. Record of Agarest War Zero is a prequel, as I understand it, to the original Xbox 360 release titled simply Record of Agarest War. Now, Zero isn't complete trash, nor is it very expensive, so why is it so low on the list, you may ask? Well, the original Record of Agarest War game is pretty universally considered the better game by a decent margin, and it also takes, conservatively for your average player dabbling in some side content, over 100 hours to beat, easily, this game being another 80 hours. Being a tactical RPG, we're already in a slightly more niche genre, and the fan service elements narrow the audience down even further. If you've already beaten the original and you want more, and you don't mind a new entry that's got some tweaks that most consider objectively worse, by all means grab this. You'll already know at this point if this one is for you. For everyone else, you're likely to get your fill of this generation-looping, offspring RPG system with the original game, so just start there. Spectral Force 3 is another pricey game, though we're back to a slightly more grounded price tag here. Being one of the few tactical RPGs on the console earns this game some points, and fans of the genre should take a look as the combat is fun and challenging. But between the poor voice acting, half-assed graphical presentation, questionable user interface, and subpar story, I'd certainly forgive you if this wasn't a high priority on your pickups list. Still, tactical RPG fans wanting 360 games, you're going to need to scrape the bottom of the barrel a little bit, and this is one you should consider checking out. This is the first of 2 consecutive entries on the list that I think will get some fanboys raging a touch, but man, they just did not click for me. The Last Remnant is overall a decent game, it's unique, it looks alright, and it even saw releases on modern platforms not too long ago, but that battle system just rubbed me the wrong way for some reason. There's a lack of control there that just bothers me. Perhaps I'd like it more with a revisit. Let me know if you think I should pick this one up again for the collection, but for now I've just been passing on picking it back up, and I don't recommend it too highly, simply because the battle system is going to be very hit or miss for a lot of people. It's not too expensive though, for what it's worth, if you do want to check it out. And here's another one that's going to have at least one person yelling at me. I wanted to like Resonance of Fate so badly, man. The presentation is solid, it's funny, the world is interesting, and the characters bounce off each other decently. But dude, once again, the battle system. What in the actual fuck is this battle system, man? Maybe I'm an idiot. Decent chance of that, actually. But this is the most convoluted, weirdly explained battle system I've ever seen in a game. If you want to wade into this chaotic mess and learn to spin all these plates, by all means, I think there's a decent game here, but most people are going to bounce off this one pretty quick, I think. When I say From Software, I bet Enchanted Arms isn't the first title that comes to mind. And frankly, it shouldn't be. It's nothing like their other games, nor is it nearly as good. That said, there's still a lot to like here. Enchanted Arms has a pretty interesting, traditional turn-based battling system, but on a grid. Not something you see very often, and it definitely adds an additional layer of depth to the combat. This game is known for being a bit of a cakewalk in terms of difficulty, but it's enjoyable enough to be worthy of consideration. The collector's edition is pretty cheap as well, and it has some fun extras for the shelf if that matters to you. Technically, Magna Carta 2 is Korean, but it very comfortably fits in the JRPG genre without question. Bit of a controversial statement to make, but I like Magna Carta 2 more than its predecessor, Magna Carta Tears of Blood on the PS2, which generally I think was a little better received. The combat is in real time here, but it offers the ability to switch between party members on the fly, to chain loose combos together for better damage multipliers. It's fairly engaging, and while the story and voice acting won't be winning any awards, the visuals are crisp. The character models are really high poly, and though stylistically they won't appear to everyone, it's nice to see a game that genuinely looks like it belongs in the 7th gen lineup after some of the others we've gone over. Be advised though that this game does cost a bit more than many others on the list, which limits its priority a bit. Alright, we're going back-to-back Dark Souls games now, and I'm going to keep them separate, with 2 being ranked lower than 1, as I think the original is the better game overall, but they may seem a little low on the list to you, given the prestige of the series. I do, of course, recommend playing these games, and they're good enough to consider grabbing for the 360, but there's a big issue here in both games on 360, and that's performance. If you've played these extremely punishing action RPGs, or the countless other titles they spawned, you'll know that choppy frame rates can and will get you killed a lot, and it's extremely frustrating. Well, we're talking about frequent 15 to 20 FPS dips on the 360 in intensive sequences, those being, the boss fights. So yeah, definitely play these, consider them on 360, but also maybe just play them on newer hardware if that's available to you instead. An underappreciated gem, and like many others on the list, an Xbox 360 exclusive, Infinite Undiscovery is a wild ride of varying quality throughout. Solid presentation and an entertaining enough cast, I think that of the mid-tier JRPGs on this console, and don't get me wrong, this is still undeniably mid, but this one stands out as one of the more charming. Not all that surprising coming from developer Tri-Ace. The action combat is engaging and straightforward, though does suffer from your typical 7th generation frame spikes. All in all, a decent title, and one that's likely worth checking out if it's piqued your interest. I'm giving Record of Agarist War a surprisingly high place on this list because, as I stated earlier, tactical RPGs are really uncommon on this console, and of the available options, this game has by far the grandest scale and offers the greatest value. Over 100 hours of playtime to complete this title, but it's split across multiple generations of characters as you pass through time and pair up with the various in-game romance options available in each generation, so it has a certain inherent cycling to it that keeps it a little fresher than it may seem. The tactical combat was a little obtuse at first for me, but eventually clicked and offered decent strategic depth. Pacing was alright, and other than some fairly tropey fanservice nonsense, the plot was passable. It's quite inexpensive as well, so grab this one if you have a passing interest in tactical RPGs, and you can tolerate a splash of anime bullshit. Though the servers are long dead for any online play for this one, as the series became so well known for, Phantasy Star Universe still offers a fun, sci-fi themed world to explore in its single-player adventure mode to satisfy those looking for a solid action RPG. The dungeon crawling is perhaps a tad repetitive, but the character models and world are well made, and the combat is straightforward but satisfying to engage with. Your interest may wane a bit over time as the appeal of what feels like a single-player MMO wanes a bit as you play, but performance is better than many other action RPGs on this list, and the world and gameplay are fun and unique to experience, and it's also cheap, which doesn't hurt. We've got a ways to go yet, and we're already getting into some bangers. Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen is a really decent Western-style action RPG, with your classic high fantasy staples intact. Magic, dragons, flexible character classes, it's got what you're looking for if you enjoy games like the Elder Scrolls series. Performance can, again, be an issue, but we're not going to be avoiding that in basically any of the more expansive games on today's list. But I must say it really does chug at times in this one, which holds it back from a higher place on the list. The action combat is pretty sick though, and the game's darker themes definitely hit hard at times. For less than $10 US, this one is a no-brainer. Where were we going to put Lightning in the gang? That was the big question going into this list. I'm grouping the trilogy together because I do think they all deserve a spot on your shelf and should be played together to experience the whole story. Shortcomings aside, and relative to most other RPGs on the console, these are honestly pretty solid. Say what you will for what expectations were at the time, how linear they are, etc., but there's still a lot to love here. Production quality is on another level for this one. Even if the Xbox 360 cutscenes are compressed garbage compared to the PS3's cutscenes, for whatever horrifying reason, but that aside, this is still a beautiful game. Fun characters and a grand adventure, we're really starting to get into the good stuff now. I do recommend the whole trilogy for the collection, even if they're near the bottom of my top Final Fantasy games I've played. Being a AAA budget Square Enix title still puts them leagues ahead of many others on this list, and I think they catch more heat than they deserve. The first game developed by the newly formed Mistwalker Studio, founded by Final Fantasy creator Hironobu Sakaguchi, and a company we may be hearing from again very shortly on this list. Blue Dragon had all the right names on its development to seemingly guarantee a phenomenal JRPG. The art style was done by legendary Dragon Ball creator Akira Toriyama. The soundtrack was composed by Nobuo Uematsu. This was the dream team that brought us Chrono Trigger, one of the greatest RPGs ever back in the mid-90s. With all that experience and advances in technology, surely this ended up being an all-time great, right? Sadly, it's honestly just fine. Blue Dragon has a somewhat middling story, and some balance issues at certain junctures that definitely hold it back. The score is definitely one of the least memorable from Uematsu as well, though Toriyama's art still slaps here without a doubt. All things counted, a somewhat disappointing game from these legends still amounts to a pretty damn good traditional turn-based JRPG overall, even if it definitely doesn't deserve a seat next to Chrono Trigger in the JRPG Hall of Fame. One of the two versions of the original game in the Nier universe, The Xbox 360 version we got in the West was actually called Nier Gestalt in Japan. They also had an alternative PS3 version that featured a younger protagonist in a different perspective, called Nier Replicant, which we later received in the West as a remake. All that said, the Nier series is now huge thanks to the success of the genre-blending masterpiece that is Nier Automata. But that all started here. This action RPG will repeatedly confound your expectations as the gameplay genres change on the fly, and master storyteller and certified madman Yoko Taro definitely nails the directing here as well. Certainly not the best way to experience the story anymore after the remake, but a damn good Xbox 360 JRPG all the same. While this is definitely a solid title that is deserving of a high spot on the list, its super high placement was also partially influenced by the fact that it's the first entry, chronologically, in the Star Ocean series. And as such, it serves as a great entry point into that world. I think the Star Ocean games are very much worth experiencing, especially with the remakes of the first two games being so solid and accessible on most modern platforms, and they directly follow this game chronologically. If you're into sci-fi and JRPGs at all, this is the series for you, and The Last Hope is the perfect entry point. As the bridge into other phenomenal games and a truly grand sci-fi adventure, I definitely recommend grabbing this one, even if it's not technically required to play it before the others. Alright, top 3, and they're all really good. Eternal Sonata is a bright, colorful journey through the literal fever dream world of the terminally ill composer Frédéric Chopin. Though the story touches on deeper philosophical concepts, it remains fairly cheerful in its presentation and approachable throughout in its gameplay. The scope of this game is refreshingly simple at times, and you can advance through it with relative ease on the 360. The PS3 version is significantly more difficult. A whimsical journey with musical themes, Eternal Sonata is easy to jump into, and a memorable experience from beginning to end. The combat is sort of a mixture of real-time action and turn-based elements, and while not overly mechanically complex, it's satisfying. Definitely a must-have title for any JRPG lover that owns the console. Alright, bet you were wondering where this one was going to end up, and at least half of you are flabbergasted that it's not number 1. Well, it's my list, bucko, and yeah, you're right, the top 2 are functionally interchangeable, and Lost Odyssey is undeniably a masterpiece, a turn-based gem, and a hell of a follow-up to Blue Dragon from Mistwalker Studio. This is the game most people think Final Fantasy XIII should have been. That said, the immortal hero of the story advances through some brutal storylines. It's a real tearjerker, it's heavy in both its themes and gameplay at times, and as such, I don't think it's a game anyone can just pick up and rip through at any time. That said, if you want a long, deep storyline with excellent turn-based gameplay and memorable characters with awesome development, you cannot afford to miss this one. Just make sure you check to see that your copy has all 4 discs if you're buying it used. It's a big game. And now for what I think is the most universally recommendable JRPG on the console, Tales of Vesperia. This extremely long-running series has produced a number of incredible titles over the years, and yet amongst the nearly 30 mainline titles, this is still considered by most to be one of, if not the best, depending on who you ask. A cel-shaded art style that's aged better than likely anything else on the list, a badass main character that doesn't take anyone's shit, and a fast-paced action combat system that doesn't totally buckle the console's performance due to the aforementioned art direction's minimalist texture requirements, you've got one hell of a recipe here. This game is funny, it's tragic, it's lighthearted, then it's heavy, but it stays good throughout, with great characters and phenomenal pacing. I'm not going to say this is a better game than Lost Odyssey necessarily, but I do think it's a bit more approachable to the average gamer. That said, just buy both, dude. Then you can consider the rest of the list after that. One little bonus entry here for the old school retro gamers in the crowd. Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection has all 4 of the original Phantasy Star games and both Shining Force games, 2 incredible JRPG series that are very much worth playing. As a bonus, there's a ton of other gems outside the genre, like all the old Sonic, Golden Axe, and Street Fighter games, just a load of classics. Consider grabbing this one, you can usually find it for super cheap. And that's every physical JRPG release we saw in the West, my friends. I don't think we'll be putting the Xbox 360 in contention as one of the best JRPG consoles out there, but as we saw, I think there's actually a pretty solid collection of titles near the top of the list that you can enjoy on here. I appreciate you sticking around to check out the list, consider subscribing if you like this kind of thing, and thanks for stopping by.